Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the meetup. And testing versus monitoring, build it right. So this is my talk. Like Ricardo said, and it's just about I've been joining USwitch for nearly a year. So given that since then, I have been wanting to talk about this topic. Because in the first month when I joined USwitch, and then I realized that I never write a single thesis, and that kind of thing, I still feel very confident to go and deploy it on production. And then I spend a little bit of time digging out, and that's why I want to share my story with you and how the mindset changes from the traditional testing model to now the pattern of testing plus DevOps. And that will, as a product engineer, that will help the productivity. So let's go back to very beginning, and then in my interview with the USwitch, and then I was asked a questions. In what situation would you not do the thesis? And I have a think, but then my immediate answer was like, nope, without any hesitation. So because as a product engineer and like everyone else, you care about what you deploy to production and ensure that what you are developed will meet the customer's satisfaction and expectation, so that we do the tests because testing is really good at finding and fixing issues before we go on to production. Another reason is that the quality of your code matters to the business. And I'll give you an example is, for example, in USwitch, we have to provide accurate energy saving figures to our customers, so that to ensure we have the energy annual usage right. So we have written loads of unit tests. That's so that beforehand we can catch the bugs, and that if that bug happens on production, that might cost you thousands of pounds. And this is some sort of examples that how you would do the TDD, and just really nice in case that, okay, you might have some expectation, and then you fail the test first, and then you implement your code and ensure the test passes. So in summary, it's like, yes, that's definitely a need that you test so that you have the confidence to go on to production. But however, like I said at the beginning, it's like for the traditional testing model, and it's like commonly you will over test it because you have so many stage environment from development, and then go to staging, and maybe then UAT environment. Eventually, you might go on to production. And moreover, just like this shift, I just like it. No offense, any QA people here. It's just like at the end of the day, it might just feel like the QA will be your productivity bottleneck, because you rely on dedicated QA team to release anything before you have the enough confidence. That's not right, because in that way, the traditional testing model will be really painful, and because of three main reasons. One is the test setup is almost as like another big project. And second is the UI automation could be abused. I will come to that later. And last but not least, it could lead to the wrong company culture. Okay, and let's talk a bit more about the details. In the first one, test setup is like another project. So it's very likely that you might have a project or application, and then your application will need to have a database. And then you have to set up your test database, then have some test data filled in to do your tests. That's all right. And then later on, as your test grows, and then you might want to speed up the test. Then how do you do that? You may want to run the tests in parallel, and each test suite will need to have a test database. That's fine. And then you set up multiple databases for each test thread, and then you speed it up. And maybe later of the day, and your business growth, and then you have third-party API to talk to, that's when you will have to set up, you need to like stop your external API response so that you don't have the dependency and you can test it. So all this can go on and on. You're never gonna stop in this stage, and you always have to develop or extend your test suite. And so that's why that setup is like another mini project inside your main application. And one of the industrial testing yearly report says like 81% of the agile teams lost a third of their time or even more on fixing their testing environment. So that's how you'll be time consuming to set up your test environment. And then the second point is about the UI automation could be abused. Now that is more about a bit of the personal experience myself, because I coming from a QA background. That is, for example, one mistake I would make before was to use Selenium UI tests for everything. Literally like every single page to test your web application and the new features. So back in the day, I developed a few of the Selenium scripts to complete a full regression tests in just 5 hours, comparing to the past that might need 5 QAs 3 days to do that in manual tests. And then we was quite exciting about this UI automation tests techniques at that time, same as the team. And then suddenly we decided that, okay, we might want to have the UI automation for every single page and every single new features that we add to the web. And then we hit this. We hit the unstability bugs. That is like when you spin up some Selenium WebDriver, and you might just have some like the race conditions that the element is not found, and then you have some random sleep, and you have to check that if the Ajax complete and an animation is done, etc., etc. So that is like endless random intermittent bugs that you don't want to deal with. And the things that I also abused was also to use this automated script as a documentation or report. There was a theory, I think it's like, many of you may heard about Gherkin, that is kind of a DSL provided by Cucumber that specified some test script, and it claimed that it could be readable for any product owner or for any non-technical people, because at the end of the day, you have to talk to the human. So you can say, given certain conditions, and then when things happen, the criteria, and then things will be executed. And if anything get wrong, and then you get a failure report, looks like this. Well, from a product engineer point of view, like even just looking at it, not looking at the detail, that's some sort of unreadable and not obvious to tell you that what had gone wrong and what had gone well. And what if you show this report to your product owner or some non-technical people, their reaction could be just like, sorry, mate, I cannot read it, I cannot help. So basically that shouldn't happen. And yeah, so, and the third one that I want to talk about is it could lead to the wrong culture in your company if you rely on dedicated QA team. By that, I mean, like if you have the QA reliance, that will discourage your product ownership. And what that happen, that will just means if anything happens on production, then people will get blamed. Most likely it will be the QA guys, because they can see them. They feel like it's their responsibility to capture all the bugs. And one of example for myself is like the company I work for, and when a project manager who found a bug on production, and then suddenly he shouted in Slack who was the QA. And even that, the other day, I realized that QA guy was fired. That's really brutal, and then hurting the team in a way. Well, yeah, it's just unlucky that have such a culture. And by the way, if you ever been blamed suffer from this blame culture, and then yeah, RVU here are hiring, and in this unprecedented situation, and I hope everyone keeping well, and we are still hiring. So if you're interested, so just send us the CV or grab us for a chat. Okay, so at the end, what we like as a product engineer is we want to continuously deliver to production without any fear. We don't want to maintain a huge test suite, and we do not want to blocked by the QA as a bottleneck, and we don't want unexpected random failures on your test scripts. And also, most importantly, we don't want to be fair, like, oh, I'm going to deploy to production. And we just want to feel confident to do so as such. So what should we do? And if we take a moment, look at this test pyramid that was like, I think it's originally from Mike Cohn in 2009. It was summarized that in the ideal test model, you should have at least 70% of your tests are unit tests. That's just like at the beginning when I mentioned, you have some important tests to cover the cases that might cost you thousands of pounds as a business. And then some black box tests for integration tests, and then end-to-end, that most likely could be the UI automation. And so by the look of that, it just made me think, could you possibly skip the top two, which are the integration tests and then end-to-end tests? Could we skip them and then we can just release to production fast, but still have a certain confidence? And the end, I found out, yes, after my experience the first month in the user switch, I realized, yes, you can do so as such if you have the test with the DevOps pattern. So what to monitor? We should monitor what matters to the business. By that, I will give you some examples. It's like when every time I deploy to production, if I don't have to bother or I always watch certain graphs. So this one is the SLO, the service level objectives graphs. That gives you an idea that okay, we agree that most of the time, 99.9%, our web application should be available to our user or provide the necessary functions. And if this object is met, then we are good. Otherwise, if anything below even just 0.1%, we are kind of like in trouble, and then we have to spend time investigate, even your unit test is passed. So that's good. And the next one we will look at is the service response time, because sometimes your function might work, but at the end it might cost a lot of time. And such as this graph tells you that, for example, in one cases, we might just send out certain emails to our customer, and suddenly our traffic increase, and then suddenly you will see a spike on your graph to saying, hey, your service response gets longer. It might just be because of the number of traffic you have is too many. It's time to investigate. And this one is the stats that this number of requests you have in different status. So if you can see, I think it's like 200, that's fine. We all know that means our web application is in health situation. But if you have an increased 500 response, and then that will just give you an alert, and you should spend time to investigate. But if not, when you just do a deployment, you're still seeing the same graph as this, you'll have a happy life. And it also helps to cover some sort of like untestable bug, such as the graph that tells you that if the page costs how many bytes of the users. So if this increase, you can easily tell that, okay, maybe we have we are consuming too much of your data by the code that we produce. And last but not least is also worth mentioned, at the end of the day, it is the business that matters. We should, as a product engineers, we should not only just checking the performance, your service, those servers healthy, and then you should also look for the business check. So by that, we means we also should set up some graphs checking the number of sales or whatever KPIs that matters to your business. And then you will realize that day by day or even hours by hours, and maybe there was some hitting things that impacting your business performance, then you keep track on that. So, and that's how I started monitoring. And then those graphs just made my life a bit more easier and to release that. So we monitoring now business instead of we are doing so huge lots of like regression tests, but we still figure out, okay, there are bugs on production. And then it also a trade-off to the business and engineers. We can tell them that maybe we should accept certain risk at the business level so that we can have a rapid release on production, and then we still can just iterate faster. So with all this in hand, it's just suddenly life become very easy, and you just like no longer fears that when you deploy to production, if there's a bug on production and you look at the graph, okay, there's a bug. You just keep calm and dig out. And here is some sort of reports just telling the trend on the testing with DevOps before. It's like from 2016 till 2019, the test team size becomes smaller and smaller. It just mainly because this testing with DevOps pattern, testing is now with the DevOps. It's no longer like a dedicated QA team. And there's also quotes, and one of the QA manager took the survey, was saying, I can see the software testing field became purely a DevOps shop. The line between tester and developers will become increasingly blurry. And so back to this graph. So eventually it's like you should make the decision where to trade off the top two with the testing DevOps, and then your judgment will be at the end of the day your business value. Monitor what it is important to your business, and then you'll be safe to deploy quicker onto production. Yep, it depends on the business value. That's the end of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So how did you feel about this change in working?
Yeah, I really feel that's cool because, like I said, if I was suffering from the UI automation a lot, whereas I want to focus more on product. And then with that in mind, it's like comparing to before, I release to production once per week-ish, and then come to the point where I have multiple release per day, and without any like fear. That is really good.
Cool. We have a question. We have a question from Josh. If you don't have integration and end-to-end tests, and your monitor alerts you to a problem in production, how do you quickly identify where the root of the issue is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we had the monitoring in place, and then people will act actively, and then we definitely have certain like bug reporting that as the first hint about where is the bug coming from, and then you start to trace it down. And I think the point here is like debugging is definitely a tool, and then you have a bug checking system to help you to debug. The point to monitoring is like you giving like quicker time to identify there is an issues on production, even you don't have enough tests. You haven't done too much tests.